The throne hall was a place no living being entered without fear. Its black stone pillars rose like spears toward a ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was polished with the weight of countless knees that had bent before the one who ruled here. All across the galaxy, his name was spoken with trembling voices, and those who dared to whisper it too loudly often vanished. For the aliens who stood inside the hall, there was no greater terror than being summoned to witness their king. The king himself sat on a massive throne of iron and bone, his frame taller than any warrior, his eyes burning like twin suns hidden behind smoke. Around him stood generals, priests, and servants, each one trying not to draw attention. The sound of silence itself felt heavy, broken only by the low hum of power radiating from the throne. For centuries, this hall had seen only one thing: submission. No being ever dared to stand tall in the presence of the king. All had bowed. All had begged. All had feared. But then the great doors of the hall began to move. Their iron weight dragged across the stone, making a growl that echoed like thunder. Every alien turned toward the sound. No one was expected. No one was allowed to enter without permission. The doors opened wider, and the light from the outside spilled into the hall, cutting through the shadows. In the light stood a figure so small, so fragile, that for a moment the hall fell into confusion. It was not a warrior with steel armor. It was not a beast with claws. It was not a messenger from another empire. It was a human girl. Alone. The aliens whispered in disbelief. Many of them had fought humans before in distant battles. They knew humans were weaker, slower, less advanced in the eyes of the great empires. Yet, despite all this, there was something about this girl that made their voices falter. She walked forward, her steps steady, her face calm, her eyes sharp as if she had already weighed the danger of the room and dismissed it. The guards tensed. Their spears glowed, ready to strike. But the king lifted one finger and they froze in place. He wanted to see. He wanted to understand. Who was this fragile creature who dared to step inside his hall as if it belonged to her? The girl stopped at the center of the room. The aliens around her leaned back as if afraid of standing too close. The silence thickened. Her small frame looked almost swallowed by the endless space of the hall. Yet she did not tremble. She did not bow. Her head was high, her hands relaxed at her sides, and her eyes locked onto the king. The king rose slowly from his throne. The ground seemed to shake with each movement of his colossal frame. His shadow stretched across the floor like a dark wave swallowing the light. He descended from the throne and walked toward her, each step sounding like a drumbeat of war. The aliens around the room pressed themselves against the walls, not daring to breathe too loudly. The girl remained still. Her eyes did not lower. She did not show fear. This simple act, this refusal to bend her head, was more shocking than if she had carried a weapon. The aliens whispered again. No one had ever dared look directly into the eyes of their king. No one had ever stood without trembling. The king stopped before her, towering above her like a mountain over a stone. His voice, when it came, was deep and sharp, shaking the air. "Do you know where you stand?" The girl answered with silence. The king's eyes narrowed, his fury rising, but her face remained calm. It was not arrogance. It was not madness. It was something else, something the aliens could not name. She simply stood there as if his power did not touch her. The hall seemed to lean closer. Every being held its breath, waiting for the next word, the next strike, the next sound that would break this unbearable tension. The king leaned down, lowering his head until his burning eyes were level with hers. "Every creature in this galaxy kneels before me," he said. "Why do you not?" The girl finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but in the silence of the hall it cut through like a blade. "Because I do not kneel." A wave of disbelief spread across the chamber. The aliens looked at one another, their faces twisting in confusion and fear. Her words were too simple, yet they carried something they had never heard before, something heavier than the king's voice, something that made the very walls seem to listen. The king straightened, his massive chest rising with anger. His hand tightened into a fist and sparks of raw energy flickered in the air around him. The aliens braced themselves for destruction. They expected the human girl to be reduced to ash in a heartbeat. Yet she did not move. Her calm presence in the face of certain death was worse than any weapon. It was a mirror held to the king, and in that mirror, the aliens saw a truth they had never faced. Fear was not universal. The silence stretched on. The king had all the power of the galaxy in his hand, yet he hesitated. Not because she was strong, Not because she was dangerous, but because she was not afraid. For the first time in centuries, the throne hall did not belong to the king. It belonged to the human girl, and the aliens who had always trembled before their ruler now trembled for another reason entirely. The king stood over her, his towering frame casting a shadow that covered her completely. The air burned with power, yet the human girl remained calm. Around them, the aliens clung to silence, their claws twitching, their eyes wide. None of them had ever seen such defiance. To stand before the ruler of galaxies and speak without trembling was a crime beyond imagination. Yet here she was, still breathing, still unbroken. The king's hand rose, heavy with energy, each spark bright enough to blind the weak. The floor cracked beneath his rage, and the walls shook with the pressure of his will. 100 creatures in the hall dropped to their knees, begging the king not to destroy them by accident. But the girl stood firm, her small figure steady against the storm. Her eyes never left his. That simple act made every alien more uneasy than any weapon could. They had always believed fear was natural, that it belonged to all life as surely as hunger or death. But this girl had none. It was as if she was made of something else, something alien to them all. The king lowered his hand but did not strike. He wanted to see more. He wanted to tear apart the reason for her calm. His voice rolled like thunder across the chamber. "Tell me, human, what gives you this strength? Is it arrogance? Or ignorance?" Her reply was quiet but sharp enough to cut. "It is choice." The aliens shivered. Choice. The word echoed through their minds like poison. None of them had ever chosen to resist the king. To choose defiance was unthinkable. Their survival had always depended on obedience. Yet this fragile being dared to speak of choice in a place where even thought was bound in chains. The king leaned back, studying her, searching for weakness. His anger was rising, but something else stirred beneath it, curiosity. His generals shifted uneasily at his hesitation. They whispered among themselves, afraid that this small defiant creature might be undoing what centuries of terror had built. One of the priests finally cried out, unable to bear the silence. "Strike her down, my king. Show her what happens to those who do not bow." The king turned his head slightly, his burning eyes silencing the priest instantly. He wanted to decide for himself. He wanted to crush her, yes, but not too soon. A predator does not kill until it understands why its prey does not run. The girl lifted her chin slightly. "You think power is measured in fear," she said. "But fear ends the moment one refuses to carry it." Her words, simple and calm, struck the aliens harder than any blow. They shifted back, claws scraping against stone, eyes darting to the king for reassurance. But the king did not speak. For the first time, the throne hall felt like it belonged to someone else. The silence thickened, suffocating. The aliens felt something none of them had ever known. Doubt. If fear could be refused, what did that mean for them? What did that mean for the countless worlds forced into silence? The king's fury grew hotter. His eyes burned brighter. His voice deepened to a growl that made the floor tremble. "Do you think you are greater than me, human? Do you think your small defiance can stand against eternity?" The girl did not blink. "I do not need to be greater. I only need to be free." The words struck like lightning. Some aliens gasped. Others closed their eyes as if to block them out. Freedom was not a word spoken in this hall. Freedom was a dream buried beneath centuries of terror. And yet here it was, alive in the voice of a human girl who should have been crushed at the door. The king's aura flared, filling the hall with fire-like light. The heat pressed against the aliens, forcing them lower to the ground, choking them. But the girl stood unharmed. She did not flinch as flames coiled around her, as shadows tried to swallow her. The king lifted his arm again, his hand shaking with fury. The hall braced for destruction. But again he stopped. The reason was not weakness. It was the way her calm unsettled him. In her eyes he saw no fear, no worship, no submission. He saw a mirror that reflected back not his strength but his chains. The aliens could not understand it, but they felt it. Their whispers rose again, broken and uneven, filled with confusion. Some trembled for their king. Others trembled for themselves. If one human girl could stand, then perhaps everything they believed about power was a lie. The king spoke at last, his voice deep and strained. "If you will not kneel, then you will prove your worth. I will break you in the eyes of all, and your defiance will become dust." The girl's calm face did not change. "Then let them watch." The hall grew colder, though fire still burned in the king's aura. The aliens pulled back farther, uncertain whether they feared their king or the girl more. The silence stretched again, sharp and endless. Somewhere in that silence, a truth began to take root, though none dared to say it aloud. The king, feared by billions, was no longer the center of the hall. The human girl was, for the first time, the throne did not hold the greatest weight. It was the voice of one who refused to kneel. And though she was small, though she was fragile, her presence filled the chamber with something greater than power. It was something the aliens had never seen before, something their king could not control. It was freedom, standing in the shape of a human girl. The hall was restless. The aliens pressed against the walls as though the stones might protect them. They had seen their king destroy fleets with a gesture, silence entire worlds with a single command. Yet tonight he did not destroy, he tested. And that frightened them more than fire. The human girl stood alone in the center, her shadow swallowed by the glow of the throne. Her calm face was more unbearable than any scream. The king paced around her like a predator circling prey, yet the prey would not move. He watched her with burning eyes, waiting for the smallest crack of weakness. None came. Finally, his voice rose, sharp and cold. "You refuse to kneel, you speak of choice, and you dare to whisper freedom in my hall. Then prove it. Show these creatures that you are not a fraud. Show them your defiance has weight." The aliens leaned forward, their bodies tense. They expected her to beg, to collapse, to reveal fear at last. But the girl only turned her head toward the crowd. Her eyes swept over them, and for the first time the aliens felt exposed, as if she could see into the corners of their minds. She did not shout. She did not raise her arms, but the hall fell into silence once more. The king lifted his massive hand, and the floor between them split open. From the crack rose a beast, forged in chains and bred only for destruction. Its hide was black as ash, its eyes glowing like molten stone. The creature roared, shaking the hall so violently that dust rained from the ceiling. The aliens shrank back. Many had seen this beast devour prisoners, challengers, and enemies of the throne. None had ever survived its jaws. The girl turned to face it. Her body was still, her breath slow, her eyes unblinking. The beast clawed at the stone, leaving trails of fire in its wake. It opened its mouth wide, its teeth gleaming, its hunger endless. The king folded his arms and stepped back, his voice rumbling. "If you are free, then let your freedom keep you alive." The beast lunged. Its weight shook the ground. Its claws slashed through the air, its roar filled every ear. The aliens cried out, certain she would be torn apart. Yet at the very last instant she moved. Not with speed, not with force, but with precision. She stepped aside, so calm it looked like a dance. The beast's strike hit only stone, and its roar turned to frustration. Gasps filled the chamber. No one had ever evaded the beast. Not once, the girl's eyes never left it. She moved again, each step light, almost delicate, as the beast's massive body thundered past her. It attacked again and again, but she slipped aside, untouched, as if she had been walking this path her entire life. The king's eyes narrowed. His beast grew more furious, tearing stone from the floor, filling the hall with heat and fire. But no matter how savage its attack, it did not touch her. The aliens were no longer whispering. They were watching in stunned silence, unable to understand how such a small, fragile figure could move so freely against something built to kill. At last, the beast stopped, panting, its molten breath steaming across the cracked stone. It stared at the girl with confusion, almost as if it too could not believe she was still alive. The girl met its gaze, her calm eyes softening, and for a moment the creature froze. She stepped forward, closer to the beast. The aliens gasped again. No one approached the monster willingly. But she did. She raised her hand slowly and placed it against its burning hide. The creature shuddered, its roar dying in its throat. Its glowing eyes flickered, and instead of rage, they filled with stillness. The chamber was silent. Every alien felt their hearts pound, their throats close. The girl did not fight the beast. She calmed it. She tamed it. The king's jaw tightened, though his face showed no fear. His voice was cold, but it carried an edge that his followers had never heard before. "You trick my beast with softness. But you cannot trick me." The girl lowered her hand and looked at him again. "It is not a trick. It is what you never understood. Power does not come from fear. It comes from what stands after fear is gone." The aliens flinched as though her words struck them like whips. For years they had bent under fear. They had seen no other way. Yet here stood one who moved without it. One who had silenced the king's beast without a weapon, without chains, without blood. The king stepped forward, his massive frame shaking with fury. The ground cracked beneath his weight. Enough. You speak like a flame, but flames burn out. I will not ask again. Kneel. The girl lifted her chin, her voice steady. Then you will wait forever. The words rang out across the hall, and for the first time in living memory, the aliens looked at their king not with devotion but with doubt. The beast behind her lowered its head, no longer an enemy, no longer bound by rage, and the aliens realized something that filled them with terror greater than any command. Their king's greatest weapon had not destroyed her. It had bowed to her. The beast stood behind her, no longer a weapon of terror but a silent shadow. Its great head bowed slightly, its molten breath softer now, as though it too had chosen not to kneel to the king but to follow the girl. The aliens stared with wide, trembling eyes. None of them had ever seen such a thing. The beast that had devoured generals, that had silenced worlds, now obeyed someone who had walked in unarmed. The king's hands curled into fists. His throne hall, once a place of total submission, now felt unstable. The whispers of his subjects spread like cracks in stone. He could hear them, fragments of disbelief, of doubt, of fear, not of him but of her. He slammed his hand against the floor, and a wave of force erupted across the chamber, throwing many creatures to their knees. The pillars shook, the walls groaned, and fire flared from the cracks. Yet she did not move. The girl's hair blew back in the storm. Her clothes tore against the violent air, but her feet remained planted on the stone. Her eyes still locked with his, calm and unbroken. The beast growled softly, not at her, but at the king. The king's voice thundered, each word burning. You defy me before my people. You steal what is mine. You think yourself unbreakable, but you are still flesh. You will bleed like the rest. He raised both hands, and from the air came fire and shadow twined together, twisting into a storm of pure destruction. The heat scalded the aliens even at the edges of the hall. They cried out, covering their faces, their scales, their skin, their wings from the blaze. No one could survive such fury. No one except the one who stood in its path. The storm rushed toward her, faster than any beast, heavier than any blade. The girl closed her eyes and breathed. Then she stepped forward, not away from the fire, not in retreat, but toward it. Her hands spread open, empty, and the storm struck. But instead of consuming her, the flames split. The shadows parted. The fire raged on both sides of her body, licking the walls, blackening the stone, but she walked through untouched. The aliens screamed in disbelief, certain it must be some trick, some hidden shield. But there was no shield. There was only her. She walked through the storm as though it were nothing but smoke. And when the fire died, she stood there unburned, her calm face now lit with a glow that seemed stronger than the throne itself. The king's breath caught, though he tried to hide it. His aura flared again, desperate, furious. The girl spoke once more, her voice even. You build your throne on fear, but fear cannot touch me. That is why you tremble. The aliens recoiled. Tremble. The word stung like a wound. Their king had been the one before whom all others trembled. To imagine that he himself could feel it was unthinkable, yet when their eyes shifted back to him, they saw something they had never seen before. His hands shook. His fury was no longer only rage, it was defense. The beast behind her roared, but it was not the roar of a servant obeying a master. It was the roar of a free thing. The aliens shuddered as they realized the truth. The girl had not stolen the beast. She had broken its chains. A soldier near the wall dropped his weapon. Another stumbled backward, his knees weak. A priest covered his mouth, his voice lost, and slowly the whispers changed. They were no longer of fear. They were of wonder. The king's eyes flared with desperate light. He bellowed, "Do not be fooled. She is nothing but a spark, and I am the sun. I will crush her before you all." He lifted his arms once more, gathering the power of worlds, but the girl's calm voice cut through the storm. You cannot crush what refuses to kneel. You cannot chain what chooses freedom. The words struck the hall harder than fire. The aliens felt their bodies shiver, not from heat but from the weight of something new pressing into their minds. They had lived all their lives under chains they could not see. Now those chains trembled. The king hurled his power down upon her, but the beast leapt forward, standing between them, roaring so fiercely the ceiling split. The throne hall shook as stone fell and fire cracked the air. Yet through it all the girl remained still, her hand resting lightly on the beast's hide, her eyes steady on the king. The power faded, scattered like smoke in the wind. The king's chest heaved, his fury unable to burn away the sight before him. For the first time he had unleashed his full might upon something, and it had not bent. Not only had it not bent, but it had grown stronger. The alien's whispers grew louder now, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. They spoke her name, though they did not know it. They spoke of the human, the fragile being who had walked into fire and come out untouchable. The throne hall had changed. The power no longer clung to the king's throne. It clung to the girl who stood unburned, unbroken, unchained. The king's voice shook the walls once more, but this time it sounded less like a god and more like a man. "You will not leave this hall alive." The girl looked at him with quiet certainty. "Perhaps not, but you will never leave this hall the same." The aliens froze. The weight of her words filled them with a fear greater than the king had ever given them, because it was not his fear. It was their own awakening, and in that moment they understood. The turning point had come. The throne hall no longer felt the same. Where once fear had ruled every breath, now something else lingered in the air. The aliens stood pressed against the walls, their eyes wide, their voices broken into whispers. Their king, the ruler who had crushed countless empires, now faced a single human girl who would not kneel, and the balance of the galaxy itself seemed to shift in that moment. The beast stood beside her like a guardian, its molten eyes dimmed, its chained rage gone. The hall that had always echoed with screams now echoed with silence, a silence heavier than any roar of battle. The king's breath came hard, his massive chest rising and falling as though even he was struggling against an unseen weight. For centuries, the aliens had told stories of the throne, stories of the unbreakable power of their king, the terror that kept worlds in line. Yet here was a new story being written in front of them, one that no chain could erase. The girl had walked through storms of fire and shadow. She had tamed the beast meant to devour her. She had spoken of choice, of freedom, of defiance, and she had not once faltered. The king's voice, when it came, was strained but still thunderous. "You are one against thousands. You are a spark against a flood. Do you believe your defiance will last when I crush you?" The girl's eyes never left his. Her voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "It is not about me. It is about what they see, and they will never unsee this." Her words fell like stone into water, ripples spreading to every corner of the hall. The aliens shivered. Many lowered their eyes, not in submission to the king, but to hide the doubt now burning inside them. The truth was simple but terrifying. Fear had cracks, and once broken, it could never be whole again. The king's rage flared, but beneath it was something new. His people saw it, even if he tried to bury it. They saw hesitation, they saw unease. And in that single flicker, the terror they had carried for generations began to bleed away. The girl stepped forward, the beast rumbling low behind her. The stone floor cracked beneath her small feet, but she did not stumble. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence it rang louder than any scream. "They feared you because they thought no one could stand. Now they see one has. That is enough." The aliens turned their eyes toward her, their scales, their wings, their claws trembling. They had lived in shadows for so long that the sight of light was unbearable. Yet once seen, it could not be forgotten. Some whispered to themselves, some clutched their chests, some simply stared. The thought had already taken root. If one could stand, perhaps more could. The king lifted his hands again, gathering power so vast the air itself seemed to burn. The ceiling cracked, the walls shook, and the throne groaned under the force. But even as the hall began to break apart, the girl did not move. She looked up at him, her voice unchanging. "Strike me down. Destroy me. But you cannot destroy what I have already given them." The aliens gasped. They understood. Her defiance was no longer hers alone. It had spread into them like fire leaping from torch to torch. Even if she fell, the flame would not. The king roared, a sound of fury and fear woven together. His power surged, filling the chamber with unbearable heat. Yet when he cast it down, the beast roared louder, standing firm in front of her, shielding her with its massive body. The hall shook, stone shattered, flames raged. But when the smoke cleared, she still stood. The beast still stood, and the king's power, for all its might, had not silenced them. The aliens no longer hid their whispers. They spoke louder now, voices rising like waves. Some cried out in disbelief, others in awe, and some even dared to laugh. Laughter born not from joy, but from the release of chains too long carried. The sound filled the chamber, and the king heard it. It was the sound of fear breaking. The girl turned to them, her eyes calm. She said no grand speech, no long command. She simply spoke a truth they could not deny. "You do not have to kneel." The words spread through them like fire. They repeated them, uncertain at first, then stronger. "We do not have to kneel." The chant grew. 100 voices, then 1,000, rising until the very throne shook, not from power but from rebellion. The king's fury turned to something worse. His eyes blazed, but his body seemed heavier now, as though the weight of centuries pressed against him. He shouted, but his voice was drowned beneath theirs. For the first time, his throne hall was not his. The girl stood at the center, her figure small, her body fragile, yet the strongest presence in the galaxy that night. She had not drawn blood. She had not raised a weapon. She had only stood without fear. And in doing so, she had done what no army could. She had broken the silence. The aliens saw it, and they trembled not at their king, but at the human girl who had shown them what it meant to stand. The revelation was clear. Their king was not eternal. Fear was not unbreakable. Chains were not forever. The king stepped back, his fury shaking his bones, but the doubt in his eyes was clear. He had ruled with terror for lifetimes. But now, before the eyes of his people, he had been challenged by a fragile creature from a small world called Earth. And though she might fall, the truth she carried would not. The girl lowered her head slightly, her voice soft, almost like a whisper. "You thought they trembled for you. Now they tremble because of me. Not for what I am, for what I showed them." The hall erupted with voices louder than fire, stronger than chains. The king stood surrounded not by obedience but by awakening. And in that moment the galaxy itself began to change.